is a tool that we've developed to help you work out your labour rates. So whether you're a builder or a designer, we're all effectively selling time. So this allows you to look at what your costs are and then work out the rates that you need to charge to be able to achieve the sort of margin that you want to achieve. And then also within the different roles that employees might play, so whether it's a labourer or a tradesperson or a junior designer or a senior architect, this allows you to work out the average rates for each of those and set your pricing. So the first sheet is intended for you to input the details of your team and work it all out. The second sheet is a worked example. So the idea is it lets you see an example of sort of how we intend the sheet to be used. This row here has notes in it just to explain what each of the columns are for and what the purposes for the values that you're entering in. And then down the bottom here is where you enter in your employees, contractors for that matter. So the first column is the name of the person, so you know who it is. The next column you say whether it's an employee or a contractor. The difference being whether you've got a cost in the employment costs like ACC and so on with an employee, and you don't have to with a contractor. The next column is the amount you pay them, so whether it's an annual amount, a salary, or an hourly rate. And then this column here, you tell the spreadsheet whether it is annual or hourly rate. The next column is the role that they're performing. So this will allow you to work out an average rate for the various people doing those roles. There's a drop-down list here. The values in that drop-down list come from down here. So if you want to change it to reflect what you call your team roles, you just update it in here and it'll reflect through into this drop-down list. The next column is the number of hours a week. So this is the typical hours a week that you aim to work for your business and that you want to work the costs out against. And then it uses that for working out the hourly rate. So it's definitely critical for an annual salary because it will have quite a big impact. Obviously for hourly employees, it won't change this number here. So this turns the annual amounts into an hourly rate, and then everything else is worked out as an hourly rate. This allows us to say, in terms of the mix of your team, how many days a week they're working. So typically it's 5 days a week, but if you've got a contractor on board for 3, you can just change that to 3. This column is for any non-taxable allowances. So you might be paying travel money or tool money or something like that. This allows you to put those in and it'll build it into your hourly rate cost. The next column is sick leave. So legally it's 10 days a year. If you want to be conservative, you'd allow for the whole 10 days a year. You'll, I guess, have a better idea as to whether your team always takes the 10 days or not. If you're averaging 5, then you might want to just plug in 5. But the conservative approach would be to put in 10, so you're fully allowing for the fact that they may be off work. Next column is annual leave. So again, legislative requirement is 4 weeks a year, but you may be having a higher amount. So this allows you to edit that. Obviously with contractors, you don't need to fill those in because that's all part of the contracting rate. If you do put it into here, the spreadsheet will just ignore it. Discretionary days is if you have other days off that you just want to cost in. So in case of our team, we work a 9-day fortnight. So it means that our guys get a bunch of extra days off during the year, which we get a payback and better productivity out of it. But that does cost back into the hourly rate. So this gives us the option of costing it back in if we want to. This is a little bit of a fudge factor, so it allows you that if you've got an employee that's maybe a bit less productive than they should be, than the rest of them, but you're still paying them a higher hourly rate, and you want to compensate for the fact that they're effectively costing you money if you just build them out at normal time. So it does allow you to put in a lower percentage, and it'll bump up the hourly rate. So this formula here is just calculating the non-working days. So because of the leave and the sick days and the discretionary days, they're only working 80.2% of the year. So 19.8% of the year is non-productive, so is not non-billable. Next column is the ACC rate. So you'd want to get that off your ACC report. It obviously varies across the industry depending on what accident risk there is. Building's pretty high, so typically a building rate would be up around that 7 or 8%. Ours being office workers are sort of in the 1 or 2% range. For employees, you need to say whether they're in KiwiSaver or not, so that then allows for the fact that you've got to make your employer's contribution, and that obviously impacts your costs. But this ACC one is if you want to if you've got a high accident rate, and with ACC you've got to pay the first week's wages before ACC kicks in. So if you wanted to allow a percentage to recover some of that, you could. This is for liability insurance. So we've got public liability insurance, professional indemnity insurance. So by putting a percentage in here, it allows us to look to recover that as part of our hourly rate. Down the bottom here gives a total for the year as to what you've recovered based on the percentages that you've put in. So the idea would be as you play with this percentage to get the number here that you want to recover. This then shows the total for the insurances and so on. So in this case with the ACC and Super Kiwi Saver and all that, it works out to 12.8% is the total insurances for this employee. All the columns that are in the dark blue are ones where there's formulas. So you can see up here there's a big formula. So those are ones that you don't want to overtype. They're not protected, so you can overtype them. So just be careful not to, otherwise it'll break the spreadsheet. This then gives you a total cost for the wages. So that's the number of hours times that hourly rate. And then this is the total employment cost. So that's the wages plus these percentages. So that means this employee is costing us $1,850 a week or thereabouts. Next, we're just going to grab some productivity stuff. So we obviously got to pay 2 lots of 20 minutes a day for morning and afternoon tea breaks. You may want to allow some time, non-productive time. So meetings, training, that sort of thing that you want to recover out of your hourly rate. This allows you to budget for some wet time. So depending on just how you run your business, and obviously if you're an architectural designer in an office, this would be zero. But on site, you may want to build in to recover some downtime over the year from rain. So this is basically allowing for a number of hours per week. And then that results in a number of unproductive hours per week. So 6 hours a week that you're not going to be able to build, which then means because we put in 40 as a working week, the productive hours are 34 hours a week. So that then divides this number here, so your total cost by the number of hours that you're going to be able to bill for the week. It gives a cost per hour for that employee. The last column is then allows us to start looking at what sort of charge out rates we get. So down here we can enter in a markup, and it applies the markup to each of those rates to give us what the charge out rate needs to be for each one of those employees. And then down the bottom here, it gives us what the average charge out rate is. There's the margin, another repeat of the average charge out rate. So that is the sort of detail for all of the employees. And then this little table here allows us to group them together into the different roles. And so what it does is based on what we've allocated over here in terms of what roles they are, it then works out the average for all of the people that are allocated with that role. So in this case, everybody that I've allocated as labourer, the average is $48.95 an hour. And if we apply our 25% markup to that, it works out a charge out rate of $59.94. Now, obviously, you're not going to charge out $59.94, you're going to charge out $60. So this allows you to put in what your actual charge out rates are, and it then gives you what the markup is on the actual rates you're looking to charge versus what those average costs are. And then this gives you the total average charge out rate for your team versus the average cost for your team versus the 25% markup. So the idea is if whatever margin you want to achieve, you play with these rates to ensure that you're achieving about the margin that you want to get. The last little bit of information down here is the gross margin. So the difference between gross margin and markup is the amount that a percentage that you apply to the cost to give you the sell price that you want. Margin is looking at the other way around. It's saying of my sell price, how much of that is profit. And so of this $80 an hour, 20% of it is profit. And so that's just an accounting way of looking at things differently. When you're comparing your operating costs against your returns, you want to make sure that you're achieving an appropriate gross margin. So hopefully you find the spreadsheet useful.